We're inviting you to enjoy Britain's most beautiful gardens as chosen by some of our most prominent personalities. Whether they're writers, politicians or broadcasters, these luminaries are also some of the nation's greatest garden lovers. But who is unlocking the key to their favourite garden today? We've come to the edge of the New Forest, where the gardens at Boveridge House have been chosen by a well-known personality as their favourite garden. We'll be finding out why as our famous figure takes a personal journey around this exciting estate. For over 80 years, it's been the private garden to a number of fortunate families. But now, its serene spaces provide the setting for the Philip Green Memorial School, which educates children with learning difficulties. The gardens as we see them today have recently been lovingly restored, and they attract hundreds of visitors each year. But today's special visitor has an award-winning connection to Boveridge House. He's a top TV gardener who's best known for giving viewers a bird's-eye view of the gardening world. When he's not in front of the cameras, he's busy designing glorious gardens, and he recently won gold at the Chelsea Flower Show. Today, he's paying homage to the garden that inspired his winning design.
For me, Boveridge is one of those gardens which really has the ability to grab you when you walk in. You don't need to know anything about gardening. It's about the garden being alive, and it's about never being afraid to allow people to laugh and enjoy themselves in a garden. I think far too many gardens, particularly historic gardens these days, involve you walking around as if you're in a library in hushed tones. This is a garden in which you celebrate gardening and you celebrate being alive. With a garden that has so many attributes, why wouldn't you fall in love with it?
But Chris's involvement with the garden at Boveridge is more than just as an occasional visitor. 5 years ago, he worked on an early part of a scheme to restore these gardens back to their 1920s grandeur. Since then, Chris has been very active in trying to raise the garden's profile, as well as funds to pay for the restoration.
The restoration was being funded on the sale of tea and cakes, which is just extraordinary. So when I walked in and said, well, we need to do something more. We need to do something here which is going to speed up the whole process, advertise the process, and really try and get to grips with what it is that we're trying to do in this garden. Everyone looked at me and said, that's a great idea. You do it. So that's how I got involved.
Today, Chris will be paying homage to the garden that has become a significant part of his life and inspired his own award-winning designs. We'll learn about the extensive restoration project at Boveridge, and we'll meet the ladies who helped salvage this 1920s masterpiece.
When I first came, the garden had been... it's wrong to say it was neglected. It had been, I suppose, ignored. The garden had been used really as just a green space in which the children could spill. It was a warm, sunny spring day, which is perfect for viewing gardens because gardens in spring always look great. And walked in via a little wrought iron gate. And the first view you get of the garden is this, along the long borders, 125 metres of parallel borders, laid out in 1920. And as soon as you walk around the corner and that smacks you in the face, you think, this is quite a special garden.
Located near the Dorset village of Cranbourne, just north of Bournemouth, these stunning gardens occupy a 6-acre site around Boveridge House. The house itself was built in 1776, but it wasn't until 1920 that the gardens were designed and laid out by eminent designer Thomas Mawson. Mawson was responsible for the garden's overall structure. The steps, the principal trees, watercourses, and the long views were all Mawson.
He designed hundreds of different landscapes, and he started to develop notions about architecture, but also about landscape and the links between architecture and landscape. So you can tell a Mawson garden as soon as you walk into it, because it is a very close dialogue between the structural elements and the landscape elements. And this is a great example, actually, where there's a wonderful space that he's created, but there's a focal point at the end, his pavilion, and there's something that's you up to that pavilion, the lily pool, and yet there's an interim feature, a little cherub that should be gushing water.
Contrasting the hard lines created by Mawson is a soft and fluid planting scheme introduced by one of the 20th century's most influential garden designers, Gertrude Jekyll. Surprisingly, this was no collaboration, and it's unlikely either was aware of the other's hand in the design of Boveridge Gardens. The extravagant 125-metre herbaceous border is one of the longest in Britain and typifies Jekyll's use of repetition and clusters of colour throughout.
What people don't very often think of Gertrude Jekyll as designing is the more informal sections of a garden. And in a way, this area of Small Meadow is as important to the overall flavour and atmosphere of the garden as the formal beds.
In recent decades, however, the garden has sunk into faded grandeur, with Mawson and Jekyll's footprints gradually being eroded. The regeneration process to restore the garden only began in recent years, and it's a labour of love for head teacher Leslie Walter.
It's amazing how quickly you lose track of time. And I honestly couldn't tell you how long ago it was that we were clearing this out. I'd guess about 3 years, something like that.
Well, it was... We finished it in the
told
summer...
you.
Yeah, I know, I think about that. It's the summer of 2004.
That's right, yeah.
So that's when it was done. So it was done during the spring and summer of 2004.
Yeah. The nice thing is, though, that the whole restoration has kind of gathered pace since then.
Yes, I think it's rather like a snowball going downhill, really. And the more we do, the more people join in and help us, and we do a bit more. So it is gathering momentum, and hopefully it'll be finished one day.
You've got a very given date.
Yes.
The summer of 1920, you know that all the plans were finished and that Mawson had been here, and that's the time that this garden can be restored to.
And that's what we have to go for, because we've got the plans, we know what it looked like. And you're right, nobody's really messed with it much since then, apart from to keep it weeded and tidied. It's exactly as it was in 1920s. It's almost in its own little time warp. And if we can put it back and it can start off again and be looked after this time, then hopefully it will remain looking as lovely as it did then. It is a garden that still does what it's meant to do, which was to allow children to play in it.
But that's the justification for continuing the restoration, though, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, from my perspective, I'm a head teacher. I mean, the children are at the front of whatever I do. They have to be. But it's got to be a garden that can be used by them, that they can enjoy, and they get a tremendous amount of de-stressing from it. And our students need that. They need somewhere with space that they can take time out when they need it, and this garden provides that.
The school caters for students from 11 through to 19, with moderate to severe learning difficulties. In his role as one of the school's patrons, Chris is helping to raise funds for a specific horticultural study area in the gardens, where children can learn more and even propagate some of the hard-to-come-by Jekyll plants in their own nursery. Chris has noticed that the children respond quite differently to the garden than adults do.
To give you an example, when we interviewed for the most recent gardening post here, we allowed some of the kids to show the interviewees around the garden. And instead of taking those interviewees to the parts of the garden that I would take you to, the parts that are either academically or horticulturally important, the children took the interviewees to the parts that were important to them. They took them to the trees that they climb, to the woodland where the fairies live. And I think that is a mark of the way that children connect with the garden. They see it through a different eye, and they see it with beautiful clarity that academics and horticulturalists and educationalists fail to see.
Chris's passion for gardening is something which is passed between the generations in his family.
I don't really come from a professional gardening background. My grandmother was a great gardener, but very much because she loved flowers. She didn't know what they were called. She didn't really care what they were called. She had a fantastic collection of gardening books, which she never read, but she cut the pictures out. But my grandfather's approach to gardening was very serious, very austere. It was about growing the biggest tomatoes you could possibly grow. And the two of them just bickered constantly in the garden, largely because she wanted more space for her flowers and he needed more space for his mammoth runner beans. And the two of them, I suppose, exposed me to horticulture. My kids love coming to gardens. The eldest one is 7, and she's already said, I want to be a gardener when I grow up, but I think that's just to appease me, actually. When I bring them to a place like this, the one thing that any child does, faced with a big canvas like this, is they very quickly assess where the best bits are, and they look at things like which trees are best to climb, which water is best to fall into, and which hedges are best to hide behind. They just entertain themselves. They use their imagination, and that's why I think this garden particularly appeals to children.
One of the key jobs at Boveridge in the restoration process is the replanting of the 125-metre-long herbaceous border, according to the original Jekyll plans. This means that they need to introduce a lot of new planting in order to restore the border to its 1920s glory. One of the problems they've had to contend with is how to deal with the rampant weed ground elder. Head gardener Alison Verrian takes an organic approach to rid the garden of this menace.
Transforming the garden involves pulling it to pieces and doing
Yes,
this
I
before
know.
you
It
can
looks
do
crazy,
anything.
doesn't it?
It's quite odd when you bring people into the garden and say, look, herbaceous borders.
What we do is, because we don't use any chemicals, we dig out all the plants, pick out as much root by hand as we can, which is quite painstaking, and then just put it down to grass for a couple of years. And then if you keep it mown very short, that actually, if the plant can't produce any leaves, obviously the roots can't survive, so it dies out. So this has been done for 2 years, and in the autumn we're actually going to dig the beds out again and replant to Jekyll's plans.
The other thing which is particularly striking in this area, and I suppose once you've taken all the plants away becomes immediately apparent, is the way that the taxus hedge is being affected by deer.
Yes,
it's being absolutely ravaged in the lower section.
Yes, well, people think it's my dodgy hedge cutting, but it's the height. So you can see where it dips in. I mean, that's the height that the deer can actually reach. So they've been eating it for years now, but hopefully we've solved the problem and we've moved the deer on. So it should start, you can see this year it started to shoot out again, so hopefully the bottoms will bush out.
Chris has been involved with the garden since the original restoration began, and he likes to lend a helping hand where possible.
To salvage something from a garden that could have fallen into complete disrepair. And because it is such a wonderful story and a wonderful garden, to be involved, albeit in a very loose sense, with trying to salvage something is great. You know, that's why you garden. You garden because it has the ability to change people's lives. And this is a garden that will change people's lives.
We're in Dorset, where Chris Beardshaw explains why he's chosen Boveridge House as his favourite garden.
It's about the garden being alive, and it's about never being afraid to allow people to laugh and enjoy themselves in a garden.
We found out why this garden means so much to the children of the Philip Green Memorial School, and we've seen how Chris will be making his latest contribution to the gardens at Boveridge. Although Chris likes every inch of this green and pleasant space, he does have one area which he particularly loves.
It's very difficult to choose a favourite spot in this garden because there's so much to tempt and tease. But I think if I had to choose one today, then it would certainly be Mercury. This is a great piece of sculpture. You first encounter Mercury from 130 metres away, right down the end of the main avenue. And you set off walking towards it. It's a real eye-catcher. And walk into this arena, I suppose, almost as an afterthought. And once you get here, you suddenly realise that having walked past all of the flaming colours coming up the garden, the really intense blues and the oranges, the reds, the yellows, which are just screaming at you just outside the hedge here, you suddenly walk into an area which is calm. And this part of the garden is one of the most peaceful, I think. So this is the piece of the garden that I find myself constantly drawn towards, especially when you bear in mind that it's overlooked by some of the best trees in the garden. You know, you don't get a better Faga sylvatica than that. That is an extraordinary specimen, and it's the best one in the garden to climb. And I climb it with my little girl. And it's great because it's a very obliging tree. You know, some trees are rather austere and they're a bit stiff. They don't like you to shin up them. But this one it's offering you a helping hand because the boughs dip right down to the ground. And if you're not feeling terribly adventurous, you can just sit on one of the boughs, which is almost like a little swing, and just dangle your legs. But if you're a little bit more adventurous, and everyone who's ever climbed a tree is more adventurous, then you can shin, well, pretty much up to the top, at least as far as you feel the need.
At the very heart of the garden's magic is the visual contrast created between the loose planting of Gertrude Jekyll and the formal landscaping by Thomas Mawson.
One of the nice things about this garden is it's really starting to come together. You get the idea of what Jekyll was trying to create.
She called it a phlox garden.
Not just phlox, though. She
My
bordered
asters.
She bordered it with asters, one of your favourites.
That is my favourite, partly because we had to find 165 of them, which was an enormous challenge. And saying, have you got any Aster divaricatus, previously known as corymbosis, enough times on the telephone, you become quite attached to it.
You've got two plants here, the phlox and the aster, which wouldn't naturally be good bedfellows, because the aster is really a prairie plant. It's a grassland plant. It likes to compete. It likes the shallow soils, not much organic matter, so it's perfectly happy here. Whereas the phlox is much more fussy. This is the kind of the princess of the border. It needs a deep, rich soil, lots of organic matter. And you would think that they'd be quite difficult to grow next to one another, but actually they do complement each other very well. And okay, bit of improvement in the soil required. You need a bit of organic matter and
Just a little.
top dressing every spring and so on, but it does work.
Against the softer, more fluid planting of Gertrude Jekyll sits the more formal golden yew trees planted by Mawson.
You can see exactly why Mawson used them as a focal point, almost as a statement in the garden.
Yes, they sort of mark bits of the garden, tops of steps. He's used them to mark tops of walls, this sort of thing. It sort of divides the garden up.
Well, you know, these two here are 86 years old. He probably went to the horticultural equivalent of the local supermarket, where there was one on the shelf, ready pruned, and the chances are they came in pretty much at that sort of size.
Oh, I mean, the other thing about you is maybe you'd know more about this than me, but I was reliably informed that the yew could be very helpful in treatment of breast cancer.
Yeah, that's very true. And in fact, people like the National Trust used to send their fresh tips. It's always the fresh tip, which is very high in, I think it's Taxol, which is extracted and used in cancer treatment. And there's no synthetic alternative. The trick is to prune it and get it fresh, and also to keep it fresh in the bag. And in fact, when you're pruning the plant, the best way of doing it, and it helps with the cuttings too, is to do it on a day like today. Do it on a drizzly day, on a grey day when there's not too much sunlight. And if it is sunny when you're doing it, get the hose pipe out and just spray the plant down. You get the kind of lubrication from the water, and it makes for a much cleaner cut, and the plant recovers faster. And then the cuttings are obviously much more healthy, and you can get more Taxol from them. So always, irrespective of what evergreen you're pruning, always spray them down with water first, and then use good, sharp, clean tools to give them a good haircut.
Chris's passion for the garden and its design inspired him to recreate a small part of it for all to see.
One of those moments where my brain was working faster than it should have been, I decided that, you know, what better than to take something like this to Chelsea Flower Show. There hasn't been a truly English garden at Chelsea Flower Show for many, many years. We knew, you know when you produce something and you're quietly quite proud of it, and you just hope that everyone else who encounters it really kind of gets what it's about and really appreciates everything that's gone into it and what it stands for. I mean, the response was just incredible, and to be awarded an RHS gold medal anywhere is fantastic, but to be awarded a gold medal at Chelsea for this garden is something really special, and it's the best garden I've ever created, and ironically the most straightforward garden too.
Boveridge House Garden is part of the Philip Green Memorial School, and it's situated just outside the village of Cranbourne in Dorset, just 20 miles inland from Bournemouth on the south coast. It's easily accessible by road, situated just on the edge of the New Forest. Southampton Parkway Station is a 25-minute cab journey away. As the gardens are part of the school's grounds, Boveridge House is only open to the public a couple of days a year. But on these days, the head teacher throws open the doors to the public for full access. Whilst you're in the area, Compton Acres and Cranbourne Manor are well worth a visit too. One of the main tasks in the regeneration plan at Boveridge is to restore the planting in the garden according to the original Gertrude Jekyll plans. This involves propagating a large number of plants, including these lichnis plants.
So these were sown in about May time?
Yeah, about then, yeah. So we pricked them out about 6 weeks ago, and now they're ready for potting on. And then by the end of the summer, we'll get them potted up into 2-litre pots, and they should be a good size to go in the spring.
But then that's what you should be doing at this time of the year, isn't it? Going around and having a look to see what's set seed. And with things like the verbascums, the digitalis, things like the nigella, I mean, just go and collect seed, you know, and just keep
So
the
easy
seed
just to dry
going.
it out and put it in an envelope. Use it again next year.
Do you worry about using a seed compost for sowing seeds and a potting compost for potting on, or do you use one compost for the whole
We
thing?
tend to just use a multi-purpose compost, which works pretty well. I mean, when we sow the seeds, we tend to sieve it just to get the lumps out.
Well, one of the ways of checking that you have it at the right temperature to kill all the pests and diseases and the weed roots and things like that is that a head gardener should carry a silver spoon, apparently.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to shove the silver spoon in the compost heap
Oh, I see.
overnight. And when you go back in the morning, if it's too hot to hold, your compost heap's at the right temperature to kill all the pests and diseases. So maybe you should put in for a silver
A
spoon.
silver spoon, yeah. My budget next year.
There's always something very satisfying about sowing seeds and then pricking them on and eventually seeing them
And
planted
eventually
out.
seeing them grow, yeah. Yeah, it's much nicer, isn't it, than sort of buying the plant ready-made. It gives you a better sense of achievement, really.
And it's slightly cheaper as well.
It's
When
a
you bear
lot
in mind you've
cheaper.
got all of these that we've just pricked out or
For the
potted
price
on.
of a seed packet.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
A bit of compost.
And that would have been, what, a couple of quid from
Yeah.
a nursery.
The team at Boveridge is driven to continue restoring the garden to its former grandeur. This is partly in recognition of its rich history and celebrity creators, but also because the garden represents such an amazing future for the children of the school.
Boveridge really pulls you in just about every direction. I mean, the art of creating a great garden is that it should really take you from a point of tremendous comfort, tremendous joy, right up to the point where you feel vulnerable, and then bring you back to joy. And it has to stretch that emotional spectrum, and that's exactly what Boveridge does.